Tonight on NewsWatch, praying for peace, how Christians in Ukraine are responding to recent unrest. Plus, outlining immigration reform, a look at how some in the Republican Party want to move ahead on the issue. And how players from both teams are gearing up for this Sunday's Super Bowl game. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Protests and violence have been plaguing Ukraine. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin. The civil unrest began in November, and now U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says not enough is being done to end the political crisis in Ukraine. Kerry says Ukraine's opposition has the full support of the United States and that efforts taken by President Viktor Yanukovych haven't reached an adequate level. Kerry is traveling to Munich for a regional security conference where he's expected to meet with Ukrainian opposition leaders. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president announced Thursday that he's taking an indefinite sick leave. While Ukraine has been on the verge of a possible civil war in recent weeks, Christians there are praying around the clock for a peaceful resolution, and they're also spreading the gospel in the midst of the chaos. George Thomas has that story from Kiev.
Wearing vests that say "Pray for Ukraine," Oleg Makdich and his friend have walked these streets around Independence Square, the epicenter of the political crisis, numerous times.
There's a mixture of hope and fear. People aren't sure about the future of our country.
CBN News went along as they delivered hot tea to men guarding numerous checkpoints around the square. They meet with pro- and anti-government demonstrators, including the police.
The church has to play a role in this crisis. We have to be salt and light.
I'm standing in a place called No Man's Land. It's in the heart of downtown Kiev. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers standing ready at guard, suited up and ready to do battle. On this side, you have dozens of burned out buses, hundreds of tires and barricades that have been set up by the opposition forces. Today, more than 2 months after Ukraine started this crisis, the nation remains at a standstill as the political folks try to come up with some kind of a resolution. Pastor Oleg has another solution. It's a spiritual one, and it's centered around prayer.
Oleg is a youth pastor at one of Kiev's large evangelical churches. He erected this prayer tent in the heart of the protest zone more than 2 months ago, when his countrymen took to the streets demanding changes in the government.
Our main message is that God is the only answer, not politics, not violence. We have to rely on Him to see us through this crisis.
Since November, tens of thousands of anti-government protesters have flooded the capital city, demanding the president's resignation. Zhenya Venediktova, a college student and volunteer at the prayer tent, says the political uncertainty has left many disillusioned. She spends her time on the streets handing out copies of the New Testament and Gospel of John.
It's minus 23 degrees and cold out here, but the inconvenience is a small price to pay to share the gospel with people searching.
There's an army of Christian volunteers working 24 hours a day, praying, handing out free tea and food. Marina Kirinchenko is a mother of 2 from Kiev.
Protesters have been on the streets in freezing conditions for months, so when they come for a cup of tea, I encourage them, saying, "God bless you, we are praying for you and our country, don't give up."
Pastor Oleg says hundreds of Ukrainians have stopped by the tent and many have given their lives to Jesus Christ. Andrea Tostokori was among those who came for prayer.
I'm praying for God to bring righteous leaders to our government, people who can lead our country forward.
I asked Pastor Oleg how long he plans to stay out on the streets of Kiev. He says, as long as it takes to bring peace to our country. George Thomas, CBN News, Kiev, Ukraine.
Syria is getting rid of its chemical weapons too slowly, and that's causing concern for the U.S. government. A United Nations timetable stipulated that most toxic chemical stockpiles be removed from Syria by December 31st of last year. To date, only 2 small shipments have been taken out. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel says that's not enough.
The Syrian government has to take responsibility of fulfilling its commitment that has been made. And the Russians, the United States, all of the countries involved, and as we all know, this is a United Nations Security Council resolution. It needs to do everything all of us can to assure that this timetable gets put back on track and these materials moved to the port.
Secretary Hagel says the world needs to put more pressure on Syrian President Bashar Assad to remove the toxic chemicals. American Christian missionary Kenneth Bae must finish his sentence of 15 years hard labor in North Korea. According to North Korea's ambassador to the UK, Pyongyang has no plan to pardon him. The North Korean diplomat told Sky News, quote, "When judgment is done, then it is done." Bae has been detained for more than a year. North Korean officials jailed him for so-called anti-government acts in November 2012 when he was leading a tour group there. He has appealed to the U.S. government to do more for his release. House Republican leaders are laying out a blueprint for immigration reform, trying to gain support from other GOP House members. The guideline includes a pathway to legal status for adults who are living here illegally, but not the pathway to citizenship, which many Democrats want. The GOP plan does include, however, a citizenship plan for kids brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. In an interview on CNN, President Obama hinted today he may be open to working with Republicans on an immigration deal, even if it doesn't include a pathway to citizenship for illegal adults. Derek Morgan is the Vice President of Domestic and Economic Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now with more. Derek, some Republicans are already blasting the House leader's immigration outline, calling it amnesty. What do you think?
You know, it really is amnesty, and it's unfortunate because it basically follows the Senate's same approach of trying to solve all of the immigration problems at one time, including what to do with undocumented immigrants currently in the United States. And what it does is it gives them legal status, which constitutes amnesty.
Is amnesty different from a path to citizenship?
It is. They're two separate things. Amnesty is granting legal status in the country, and then a path to citizenship would be above and beyond that to allow those who do become legalized to then also become citizens.
Well, what issues should the immigration debate focus on, Derek?
Really, if you look, we've tried to solve this problem once before in 1986, and during that time we followed an amnesty approach as well. And so in exchange for amnesty, the American people were promised that they would have workplace enforcement and they'd have border security. And really those are the two cornerstones of what immigration reform ought to be now. Solve those problems first, and potentially also update and reform our legal immigration system, and not at this time try to solve the thorny problem of what to do with those who are here unlawfully.
In his State of the Union address, the president pushed for immigration reform to be passed. Do you think we're going to see any real progress on the issue this year?
Well, I think a lot does hang on the outcome of these meetings that the House Republicans are having in their retreat over the weekend. They're discussing what to do. And right now, the Senate bill is dead on arrival in the House. But the House is now deciding what do they want to do in this area. And these standards for immigration reform that they've put out publicly now looks like they want to try to follow that same Senate path. So the question is, will enough of the rank and file Republican members go along with what the leadership is asking them to do?
The president today hinted he may be willing to work with Republicans, meeting them in the middle on immigration. Do you see, however, any real chance of compromise on the issue?
Well, it doesn't seem like that's likely at this stage. Meeting in the middle ought to be agreeing to those areas where there is agreement right now. Things like the fact that we do need a secure border. The president acknowledges that, and Republicans and conservatives in the House recognize that. If we worked on that problem now and got the border secure, and if we worked on things like workplace enforcement now, then you could have that sort of a compromise. But right now, it looks like the president and his allies and some in the House, Republican leadership, are looking at trying to solve everything all at once. And it's that comprehensive approach that was really the downfall of the Senate bill.
Okay. Derek Morgan with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you, Derek, for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Vice Admiral Mike Rogers is President Obama's pick to be the next chief of the National Security Agency. He replaces Army General Keith Alexander. Rogers is currently the head of the Navy's Cyber Command and is a former intelligence director for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The White House says Alexander will step down in March. Rogers' nomination comes as the NSA faces both congressional and public scrutiny after revelations about its spy programs. The South is finally thawing out from that historic winter storm, but it left behind some serious problems for political leaders in Georgia. Meanwhile, here in Virginia, Operation Blessing is helping dig out those who are trapped by the snow. Dale Hurd has that story.
Mild weather is being seen across the South tonight. The warmer temperatures are helping with recovery efforts from one of the worst winter storms to hit parts of the region in many years. The storm was not only a disaster for state and local governments, but for businesses large and small, as customers and workers were forced to stay home. In the Atlanta area, hundreds of drivers have finally been reunited with their abandoned cars. Schools remain closed, but state employees have been told to go back to work. Georgia's governor and other state officials apologized for not being prepared.
I'm the governor. The buck stops with me. I accept the responsibility for it.
This kind of thing has happened before, when all of Houston got on the roads to evacuate right before Hurricane Rita in 2005. The gridlock was deadly. One expert says the lesson is that cities have to have a plan.
Atlanta did not understand that snow is the enemy unless you're on a ski slope. Whatever was done was really done in response to the crisis, not because there was a plan.
Operation Blessing and the city of Norfolk, Virginia had a plan called Operation Snow Buddy, in which teams of workers helped dig out those most in need.
I was watching TV, they're reporting the weather, and they mentioned your name, so I called. Here you are. Thank you.
Operation Blessing also provided 20 tons of rock salt to help clear sidewalks and driveways. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Boy, Operation Blessing is everywhere. And for more on the work Operation Blessing is doing across the country and around the world, visit our website, cbnnews.com. Coming up, why protests are breaking out in Bangkok ahead of upcoming elections. Massive protests are growing in Thailand ahead of this weekend's election there. Tired of political corruption, demonstrators have been on the streets for months. 10 people have died and hundreds have been injured. Even so, the government is expected to win the election. And as Asia correspondent Lucille Toulousan explains, that could prolong the protests.
Anti-government protests began last fall, closing businesses and hurting tourism in Thailand's capital city of Bangkok. Government leaders fear the entire country's economy will suffer if the protests continue beyond this Sunday's election.
It's a festive mood here in Bangkok. Tens of thousands of people joined this march, and their goal is to block every main road here in Bangkok. And these people are saying that they're going to do this until they see Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra step down from office.
A failed amnesty bill triggered the rallies. It would have allowed the Prime Minister's older brother, former Premier Thaksin Shinawatra, to return to Thailand without facing imprisonment. He left the country in 2006 after corruption charges forced him from office. To appease the protesters, the Prime Minister called for a special election, but that stirred up even more anger.
The Democrat Party had already boycotted, so the Democrat Party did not send even a single candidate. So which means that the election on 2nd February will bring about election results, but the government will be in power without legitimacy.
And what about the nation's small Christian community? Where does it stand? Church leader Pastor Bunlat Boyen says many church members are on opposite sides. He's calling for unity.
The Christian people, you have to take it very serious that you are one who's supposed to be responsible, have full responsibility to your country. So your faith, your church life, that's very important.
Protesters want an election boycott, but claim they will not stop people from voting. As a precaution, the Thai government has deployed 10,000 police throughout Bangkok to secure polling places. Whatever the outcome, thousands of Thais say they are determined to continue their fight to reform Thailand. Lucille Toulousan, CBN News, Bangkok.
Up next, CBN Sports goes behind the scenes at the Super Bowl. Welcome back. On Sunday, the Denver Broncos and Seattle Seahawks will meet at Super Bowl 48. It'll be a battle between the NFL's #1 offense and #1 defense. But for many in the game, winning a championship isn't the greatest goal. Sports reporter Sean Brown talked with players on both teams who have their sights set on a higher prize.
Hello and welcome to Times Square here in New York City for CBN's coverage of Super Bowl 48, where the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks will battle it out to try and stake their claim to the Vince Lombardi Trophy. Winning the Super Bowl for the Seahawks would mean their first championship in franchise history. For the Broncos, it would make their third Super Bowl championship. You know, for a lot of the players on both teams, playing in a Super Bowl is a dream they've had since they were kids. In fact, for many of them, playing would define the very fabric of who they are. But for a few of them, their identity can't be found on the football field because there's a lot more to them than just playing football.
The Denver Broncos are highly favored to win in Sunday's matchup between the NFL's two #1 seeds. Jacob Tamme and Britton Colquhoun say, yes, they're hungry for a championship, but their happiness doesn't depend solely on winning.
Winning in football is really important to me. It's very important, but it does not define me as a man, and really, ultimately, I don't think it defines anyone. I mean, it's something that, you know, back from my days in high school, I mean, my high school coach taught us God, family, football, you know, and you got to keep it in that order. I think at the end of the day, you got to realize that it is a game and that God is authoring a bigger plan, and that's certainly a humbling feeling and keeps you grounded.
You know, it will be awesome to win the Super Bowl, but yet all these guys that have won the Super Bowl are still trying to win the Super Bowl. But that's just like the same with, you know, money's not going to make you happy. All these things that people strive for happiness, that didn't give you happiness. I mean, you're going to be happy on that stage, hoisting that trophy. You're going to go to bed at night, and then it's just you and God, you know. And so that's why, you know, faith and then you can add in family and things like that are what really fills you up and really, you know, gives you purpose and just gives you true joy, not just, you know, meantime happiness.
This is Steven Johnson's second season in the NFL, and he says he's blessed to be where he is because earlier in his career he was told he would never play football again.
I hurt my knee. I blew my knee out in prep school, and I had plenty of people tell me I couldn't play football anymore. I was never the fastest. I was never the strongest. But I tell you what, the Lord took David, and you know, he conquered Goliath and did all that. And he just told me that, look, if you have a dream, go chase it. If you believe in me, I will be the super to your natural, you know, and I'm just honored to be able to continue moving forward with this team, hopefully for as long as I can, and just continue to serve the Lord.
Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson has been criticized as an athlete for most of his life, mainly because of his size. But in the last 2 seasons, his numbers have made him a giant among men. He's the first quarterback in the Super Bowl era to post a 100-plus passer rating in each of his first 2 seasons. And he says while the stats are great, he couldn't have done any of it without the Lord.
You know, I had a lot of critics that tell me, oh, he's too short. And that was the only thing they could really say in terms of my game. And I wasn't going to believe it. I wasn't going to allow that to stop me from doing what God had put me on this earth for. In terms of my faith and how it's played a major role, it's been everything to me, to be honest with you. You know, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that, and I give him all the glory. It's a tremendous honor just to be able to play the game of football. You know, and at the end of the day, football doesn't define me. You know, I believe that my faith is the #1 thing in my life, and then you know, family and playing football.
Clint Gresham and Chris Maragos both recognize that the spoils of being professional athletes are only here for a season, and say that it's much more rewarding to invest in a relationship with the Lord that lasts forever.
I think that the second that we start to put our identity in anything other than Jesus, that's a slippery slope. And because one day football will be gone, and one day people will not know who I am or care to interview me. And so if I put my value in the fact that somebody wants to talk to me about football, man, when it's all done, your life's gonna not be that great.
My faith is everything to me. I was just saying earlier that Jesus saves. Jesus saves, and it's my true desire for all of you to come to know His love, to know that you're loved, to know that you're here with purpose, that you're here for a reason.
Free safety Chris Maragos has had a remarkable journey to get here. And he says he's learned that there's a void that only the Lord can fill, and that during times of weakness, that's when He shows up strong.
I've chased the things of this world, man. Before I gave my life to who Jesus was, I chased the money, I chased the drugs. I was doing drugs, selling drugs. My faith in Jesus through those times where everything was up and down, he continued to stay the same. And when your hope and your trust is on the firm foundation and who Jesus is, nothing can shake you. And there were moments where it was very difficult. There were moments when it was tough, but those trials produced perseverance in me. It produced character. It produced what you're seeing today.
Wow, what a great story. Our identities are who we are in Christ. Well, up next, we'll show you why one monkey may hold the key to picking who wins the Super Bowl. Welcome back. The Denver Broncos are slight favorites to win Super Bowl 48 in New Jersey this weekend, but Seattle Seahawks fans may find a little hope in a new prediction. Elijah, an ape in a Salt Lake City zoo, has correctly predicted the Super Bowl winner for the past 6 years. This week, he cast his lot with Seattle when he knocked down a helmet with the Seahawks logo on it. Elijah may not change the odds in Vegas, but his track record is better than many of the talking heads we'll see on Sunday. So you might want to go with what Elijah says. That's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.